Agatha Raisin, Mrs. Bloxby, and Sir Charles Fraith in The Inheritance of Temptation. Agatha Raisin's quiet life in Carsley takes a dramatic turn when a genealogist's research unearths a long-buried family secret, one that might cost someone their life. As secrets unravel, Agatha must navigate the tangled webs of inheritance, ambition, and murder. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Be sure to subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. "It is not pronounced like that," Agatha said, far too loudly to retreat from the statement. The WI audience turned as one, noses twitching for entertainment. Their visiting speaker, Edmund Prouse, alleged genealogist and smug possessor of a velvet waistcoat, paused mid-lecture with the air of a man delighted by interruption. "My dear Mrs. Raisin, is it?" he asked, although the whole village already knew perfectly well who she was. "I assure you the Fraith lineage has always been linked to Saxon holdings." "It was Norman," Agatha insisted. She had read it in a magazine years ago, though the details had blurred. Still, it sounded authoritative enough, until Prouse produced a laminated chart like a conjurer unveiling a rabbit. "Here is the Saxon reference," he said, tapping the sheet with his pointer. "Clear as day." The audience murmured. Someone tittered. Someone else whispered, "Agatha's done it again." Agatha felt heat creep up her neck. She hated that more than she hated her own wrinkles. Mrs. Bloxby, seated dutifully beside her, leaned in with gentle diplomacy. "I'm sure Agatha has simply recalled a different article. History is so broad, isn't it?" But Prouse was enjoying himself too much. "Quite understandable," he said with syrupy benevolence. "Genealogy is complicated work. Not everyone has the training." Agatha's jaw tightened. She wanted a cigarette, a gin, and perhaps the satisfaction of tripping him with his own pointer. Instead, she glared while he resumed pontificating about dead barons and forgotten cousins, milking the room's amusement with every other sentence. A WI humiliation was practically a village sport. When the talk ended, the hall erupted into pleased chatter. Carsley adored a public mistake when the maker of it was Agatha Raisin. At the refreshments table, Agatha held a paper cup of weak orange squash and pretended she didn't hear the whispered, "bless her heart" remarks. Mrs. Bloxby patted her hand. "Don't let it trouble you, Agatha. People forget these things quickly." "I don't," Agatha muttered, "and neither will that man." Across the room, Edmund Prouse was charming a knot of WI members with the ease of a man who had practiced being superior since infancy. He had a long nose, a longer smile, and eyes that glittered whenever someone mentioned titled families. Agatha recognized the type. Professional parasite wrapped in tweed. She drifted closer, purely to listen, she told herself. Prouse was speaking to a thrilled Mrs. Timms. "Oh yes, the Fraith estate is quite a curiosity," he said. "A lost branch, perhaps, a matter of inheritance ripe for dispute." Agatha jolted at the name. Sir Charles Fraith hated genealogists even more than he hated early mornings. If Prouse was sniffing around Barfield House, trouble was on the horizon. "Do you know Sir Charles?" Mrs. Timms asked eagerly. "Only by reputation," Prouse replied, "but I expect to learn a great deal more soon." Agatha stiffened. Mrs. Bloxby, hovering loyally by her side, gave her a warning glance. "Let us remain calm," she murmured. "Calm is overrated," Agatha whispered back. She watched Prouse drift toward the side table where assorted WI bits and pieces sat awaiting tidy-up. He examined an old donation tin with absurd solemnity, then slipped it into his satchel. "What's he doing with that?" Agatha hissed. Mrs. Bloxby frowned. "It belongs to the hall." Prouse noticed them looking. "Merely borrowing it," he said lightly. "Some interesting engraving. I'll return it once I've examined its provenance." Agatha's eyebrows shot up. "It's from a jumble sale in 1984. "History comes in all forms," Prouse replied, and swept away before she could swat him with the squash cup. Red herring, Agatha thought. He wants to look important. But even so, pocketing WI property was cheeky. She added it to her growing list of reasons to dislike him. Back home in her cosy cottage, Agatha shed her coat, muttering darkly about velvet waistcoats and smug genealogists. Hodge, her plump tabby emperor, sat on the kitchen counter licking a paw with accusatory calm. He always looked as though she'd done something wrong. "Oh, don't start," she said, dropping her handbag onto the table. Hodge decided the handbag was insufficiently stable and shoved it to the floor. Items spilled everywhere. Pens, receipts, a half-melted lipstick, and a glossy leaflet she didn't recognize. Agatha snatched it up. Exclusive Heritage Consultations by Edmund Prouse. Trace the nobility within you. The man had stuffed it into her bag. Presumptuous creature. I do not need nobility, she told Hodge. I need a large gin, and for this day to never have happened. Hodge blinked. His opinion of genealogy was not recorded, but it was certainly low. Agatha tossed the leaflet onto the counter and reached for the kettle. She enjoyed the reassuring click as it began to rumble. Warmth soothed her irritation, though she still pictured Prouse's smirk and winced. Carsley would have gossip for a week, possibly 2. Just as the kettle gave its final sigh, the telephone shrilled. Agatha braced herself. No good news ever came at this hour. She lifted the receiver. Agatha Raisin. Darling, Roy Silver's voice burst down the line like a firework coated in glitter. Are you sitting down? Tell me you're sitting down. I'm standing, Agatha said, and losing patience. Well, sit. Sit immediately. Charles is in a state. A state, Agatha. He phoned me, demanding that I find you at once. He's practically frothing. Charles never froths. He does now. Something has gone deliciously wrong, and he insists you come to Barfield House immediately. Honestly, I'm half afraid he's discovered he has a secret wife, or worse, a half-brother. Agatha's heart flickered. Prouse. The inheritance talk. Charles's name tossed about like confetti. It all slotted into place with unpleasant neatness. What exactly did he say? She demanded. That he needs you, Roy said, and that you're to get there before he does anything reckless. Oh, Agatha, do hurry. I'm living for this drama. Agatha slammed down the phone, grabbed her coat, then cursed and picked up the leaflet again. It felt like a clue, or at least a portent of further aggravation. She shoved it into her pocket. Hodge watched her bustle about with the air of a judge who'd foreseen the verdict. Don't look at me like that, she told him. Charles always needs rescuing from something. This time it's probably his own family tree. Hodge stretched, unimpressed. Agatha stomped toward the door, then paused. The kettle's warmth lingered in the room, and for a moment she allowed herself a breath. Pride smarted, dignity bruised, but mystery beckoned, and Agatha Raisin never ignored a summons, especially one wrapped in scandal. Right, she said, flicking off the kitchen light. Let's see what disaster Charles has landed in now. Hodge settled on the fallen handbag, purring faintly, as though enjoying the peace she left in her wake. About time, Charles snapped the moment Agatha marched into the front hall of Barfield House. He paced before the marble console table like a man denied both champagne and sympathy, which in Charles's case amounted to real suffering. Do you have any idea what sort of morning I've endured? Yes, Agatha said, one where you behaved like a child with a stubbed toe. Now stop flapping and tell me what's happened. Charles thrust a letter at her as though it were a venomous snake. This is what's happened. Agatha unfolded the sheet. The handwriting was neat, educated, and self-important. It belonged, unmistakably, to Edmund Prouse. Sir Charles, she read aloud, further examination of the Fraith lineage suggests a probable competing heir. Agatha's head jerked up. A competing what? A nonsense heir, Charles barked. A fantasy heir. A fabricated heir. Keep reading. She did. The letter went on about lost branches, corrective inheritance, and public exposure of misplaced claims. It ended with a polite suggestion that Charles make himself available for clarifying interviews. The words dripped with threat disguised as courtesy. Good Lord, Agatha murmured. He's blackmailing you with genealogical stationery. Charles slumped, shoulders deflating. The man is mad, an imbecile with a waistcoat. But he's done his homework. Some of the details in that letter, well, no outsider should know them. Agatha narrowed her eyes. Meaning they're true? He winced. They're rooted in truth, distorted, exaggerated, stretched like cheap elastic. That sounds like genuine truth trying to escape supervision, she said. Charles gave her a wounded look. Must you? Yes, she said briskly. Now stop sulking and explain. He led her into the drawing room. Morning light streamed across antique rugs and furniture inherited from countless Fraiths with questionable taste. Charles paused in front of the mantel, sighing heavily. The Fraith family tree, he said, is not so much a tree as a hedge, overgrown, tangled, and hiding things best left undiscovered. There are rumours, distant cousins, Possibly an illegitimate branch. Oh, don't make that face, Agatha. Things whispered about for decades, but nothing confirmed. Prowse has no right digging into any of it. Agatha folded her arms. And if he's right? He's not, Charles said hotly. He can't be. Everything is properly documented, except, of course, the parts that aren't. Before Agatha could retort, Charles's butler entered with the serene timing of a clergyman interrupting a brawl. "Mrs. Bloxby has arrived, sir." Agatha blinked. "Mrs. Bloxby? Why?" The butler inclined his head. "I observed Mrs. Raisin approaching at some velocity and judged that additional calm might prove useful." Mrs. Bloxby glided in, composed as ever. "Good morning, Agatha. Charles. I take it something has gone awry." "Everything has gone awry," Charles exclaimed. "Prowse is threatening to disgrace my entire lineage." Agatha felt a wave of irritation. Charles always softened when speaking to Mrs. Bloxby, as though she were an elegant governess who might award him gold stars for manners. "It's a bluff," she said firmly. "He's puffing himself up. He did it at the WI." Mrs. Bloxby read the letter with mild concern. "This does seem rather overreaching," she said, "but the man clearly knows something." "Knows too much," Charles muttered. "Look at paragraph 3. Agatha skimmed it. The line that snagged her attention read, "The sealed packet in the Morton-in-Marsh archive provides definitive evidence." She blinked. "What sealed packet?" "There is one," Charles admitted. "But hardly anyone knows of it. My father mentioned it once, some correspondence stored with the local archive. It's supposed to contain irrelevant family letters, old chatter, not inheritance material." "But Prowse knows about it," Agatha said sharply. Charles winced again. "Yes, and that's why I'm furious. Someone has talked. Someone has been feeding him information." Agatha's eyes landed on a young woman hovering just outside the doorway, a slender housemaid with an anxious expression and a feather duster that trembled in her grip. "Who's that?" Agatha demanded. Charles glanced back. "Oh, Lila Pike. Started last week. Harmless, I'm told. Lila, stop loitering." The girl jumped. "Sorry, sir, just dusting." She vanished down the hall so quickly she practically smudged the air. Agatha raised a brow. "She's nervous." "She's new," Charles said. "They come quivering these days." Mrs. Bloxby gave Agatha a meaningful glance. "Perhaps she's simply afraid of mistakes. We were all new once." "Yes," Agatha muttered. "But most of us didn't lurk behind door frames." Charles resumed pacing. "This is intolerable. The very suggestion of a rival heir could cause absolute chaos. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the village chatter. I'll be mocked in Evesham markets for months." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Agatha said. "You'll be mocked anyway. This simply gives people a more interesting topic." He glared at her, which pleased her immensely. Mrs. Bloxby sat gracefully on the sofa. "Charles, have you contacted the Morton-in-Marsh Library to ask whether anyone has viewed the packet recently?" "No," he admitted. "I refuse to alert the Hammes. Less absolutely necessary. They become frightfully nosy if they smell scandal." Agatha tapped the letter. "Then we'll ask them ourselves. Quietly." Charles looked horrified. "You'll barge in like a journalist seeking blood. No, no, I forbid it." Agatha's temper flared. "You don't forbid me, Charles Fraith." Mrs. Bloxby intervened with saintly diplomacy. "Why don't we consider our options calmly? Perhaps Edmund Prowse is bluffing about the packet. People often use fragments of information to appear knowledgeable. Let us not leap to conclusions." Charles's expression softened immediately. "Exactly my thought." Agatha scowled. "You only listen when she says it." "Because she says it nicely," he replied. She bristled. "And I don't?" "You are many things, Agatha dear," Charles said, "but gentle isn't usually one of them." Mrs. Bloxby coughed delicately. Agatha folded her arms again. "Fine. Let's continue investigating, but we'll do it my way." "Which is?" "Ask questions, annoy people, dig up truth." Charles sighed. "Your usual method, then." A movement in the hall caught Agatha's eye. Lila Pike again, pretending to polish a vase while blatantly listening. Her gaze darted nervously whenever Charles moved. Red herring, Agatha thought. She looks guilty enough to have stolen the crown jewels. But guilt and danger were not always the same thing. "Lila!" Charles barked. The maid squeaked. Yes, sir? Stop fiddling with that vase. Go polish the banister or something less fragile. She scampered away. Agatha leaned toward Charles. That girl knows something. She knows she'll be sacked if she chips an heirloom, Charles muttered. That's all. Before Agatha could reply, Charles's butler reappeared carrying a silver tray with a fresh pot of tea. Behind him trotted Hodge, tail high, having apparently followed Agatha's scent through the house. He surveyed his surroundings, spotted Charles's ornate footstool, a hideous velvet cube embroidered with lions, and leapt onto it with majestic satisfaction. That footstool, Charles sputtered, is a family heirloom. Hodge approves, Agatha said smugly, and he has good taste. Hodge curled into a regal loaf, claiming ownership with the entitlement of a monarch who had paid full price for the estate. Charles threw up his hands. I've lost control of everything, even my furniture. Mrs. Bloxby smiled. Sometimes animals know where comfort is most needed. Agatha almost softened at that, but Charles's sulky posture ruined the moment. Oh, don't pout, she said. Let's deal with this Prouse creature. Yes, Charles agreed. I shall confront him at once. I want every answer he has. The butler cleared his throat with exquisite timing. Sir, a message arrived earlier from Mr. Prouse's landlady in Evesham. Charles frowned. Well? She reports that Mr. Prouse did not return to his guest house last night. Agatha straightened. Did not return? No, madam. She has not seen him since yesterday afternoon. Charles paled. What does that mean? Agatha felt the familiar stir of a mystery waking at the edges. It means, she said quietly, that our genealogist may have stirred up more than inconvenient family trees. Hodge stretched on the footstool, utterly untroubled, and blinked at them as though the day's problems were all perfectly solvable, provided someone remembered to serve lunch on time. I still think you're overreacting, Charles said as Agatha marched toward Bill Wong's police car. Men disappear for perfectly respectable reasons. Boredom, for example. Agatha ignored him. Prouse didn't strike me as the sort who gets bored. He struck me as the sort who gets throttled. Bill opened the passenger door. Let's not assume anything yet, he said gently. We're just going to speak with his landlady. Charles slid into the back seat with a dramatic sigh. I knew today would involve drudgery. Then you should feel right at home, Agatha shot back. The drive to Evesham took only minutes, but Agatha spent most of it rehearsing what she'd say to the landlady. She wanted crisp questions, probing logic, and ideally a moment where Bill would mutter, steady on, in that patient way of his. It always made her feel like a dangerous detective in a BBC drama. Prouse's lodging house loomed ahead. A tall Victorian monstrosity painted the shade of porridge left too long in a pan. A plastic sign declared guest rooms. Quiet, clean, home from home. Agatha doubted all three. A woman with curlers still clinging to her hair opened the door before Bill even knocked. You're here about Mr. Prouse, she crowed. I said it was suspicious, didn't I? I told everyone at the bakery. Mark my words, I said, he's gone off because of that visitor. And did anyone listen? No. Bill tried a soothing smile. Could you tell us about the visitor, Mrs. Trimmings, she said proudly. Best listener in Evesham. You just ask around. Agatha was not remotely surprised. Mrs. Trimmings ushered them into a narrow hallway that smelled of boiled cabbage and ambition. He had someone come to see him last night, she said, lowering her voice, although no one else was present. A proper shouting match it was. Agatha leaned forward. What did you hear? Oh, I couldn't make out the visitor. Didn't get a look at them either. But I heard the man say, It's mine, not yours, clear as day. Agatha felt a spark ignite. That's a clue, Charles scoffed. Half my relatives say that before breakfast. Mrs. Trimmings beamed. Of course, I could tell you more if I had a cup of tea. My throat's terribly dry. Agatha was already heading toward the kettle she had spotted in the corner. Bill, be useful and poor, she said. I'll ask questions. Bill laughed despite himself. Mrs. Trimmings sipped theatrically. Anyway, after the shouting died down, Mr. Prouse stomped upstairs. Next thing I know, he's out the door with his coat half on, off into the night, never came back. Agatha exchanged a glance with Bill. Did he say where he was going? No, but he had that little satchel with him. Always did. Looked stuffed with papers. I told him, mind you don't lose that, and he gave me the oddest smile. Charles shifted. We'd like to see his room. Mrs. Trimmings led them up a narrow staircase that complained with every step. Prowse's room looked precisely as Agatha expected, tidy, sterile, and smelling faintly of overconfident cologne. "Good grief," Charles murmured, covering his nose. "This ought to be a criminal offence." Bill resisted, smiling. "Let's focus on actual offences, sir." Agatha prowled the room. On the small desk lay a neat stack of photocopies. She sorted through them briskly. "Fraith family documents," she muttered. "Birth records, marriage registers, but look at this." One sheet had a corner ripped off. Not old damage. The tear was crisp, recent. "Someone removed part of it," she said. Charles blustered. "Perhaps he tore it by mistake." "Don't be ridiculous. He probably slept wearing gloves to avoid creasing papers." Bill examined the torn edge. It was definitely deliberate. Agatha continued rifling. More documents were incomplete, gaps where key details should have been. Someone had been editing Prowse's research, and not kindly. A sound behind them made Agatha straighten. A tall man with 2 white teeth lounged in the doorway, wearing a jacket that screamed London Magazine office and trousers that begged for applause. "Well, hello," he said. "Didn't know this room was booked." Agatha blinked. "And you are?" "Gavin Trent," he said, offering a hand with theatrical flourish. "Investigative columnist, up here researching aristocratic scandals. The Cotswolds are crawling with them, apparently." Agatha preened despite herself. Attention from handsome London men was rarely to be trusted, but always to be enjoyed. "We're looking into Mr. Prowse's disappearance," she said. "Oh, him," Gavin said with a snort. "Bit of a bore. Wore too much cologne. Claimed he'd uncovered some old family drama. I told him I'd steal the story if he didn't hurry. He didn't like that." Bill eyed him. "Did you hear anything last night?" "Nothing useful," Gavin said. "But I did see someone sneaking out the side door, quite covered up, hood up, head down. Could have been a woman, or a small man, or a tall child. I'm flexible in interpretation." Agatha resisted, groaning. "That's not helpful." "Well, I try," he said brightly. "If you want a quote, I can produce something devastating." "We don't," Bill said firmly. Gavin winked at Agatha on his way out. "Call me if you uncover anything juicy." Charles rolled his eyes so hard Agatha worried they might stick. Self-promoting buffoon. "Possibly," she said. "But he may have seen someone." Agatha resumed her search. A train timetable lay folded inside Prowse's bedside drawer. She smoothed it open. "Look," she said. "Mercester, 6:15 p.m. He marked it." Bill leaned closer. "That could be important. If he took the train there, we might trace his route." Charles frowned. "So he left here after a row with some mysterious visitor, headed to Mercester, and vanished." "More or less," Agatha said. "We need more details." Bill took out his notebook. "I'll ask the station. They may remember him." Mrs. Trimmings appeared in the doorway again. "Oh, if you're wondering about his cologne, he bathed in it. I told him it was overpowering, but did he listen? No. Men never do." Charles muttered. "Some men have taste." Agatha shot him a sharp look. "Yours is only respectable when you're trying to impress people." He opened his mouth, then closed it, which delighted her. Bill's phone buzzed. He frowned at the display. "I should take this." Agatha watched him step to the window. His posture changed, shoulders tensed, voice lowered. "What is it?" she asked when he turned back. Bill swallowed. "They found a body near a footpath outside Mercester." Silence fell. Charles spoke first, voice strained. "A body?" Bill nodded. "They didn't confirm identity yet." Agatha felt her pulse tighten. "But you know." "Yes," Bill said quietly. "They're certain it's Edmund Prowse." Agatha inhaled sharply. She wasn't surprised, not truly, but the news felt like a curtain dropping on the last pretense of harmless genealogy. Something darker had been stirring all along. Charles paced, hands clasped. "This is absurd. I hired no killer. My family tree is not worth murder." "No one said it was you," Agatha snapped, though she understood his fear. Scandal could cling like smoke. Bill pocketed his notebook. "We need to go to Mercester. We'll follow proper procedure, but I'll take your observations into account." Agatha nodded. "We're coming with you." Charles hesitated. "I suppose I should. It is my wretched family business." Agatha cast one last look at the room. The torn papers, the timetable, the faint scent of cheap ambition lingering in the air. Clues everywhere, lies everywhere, and somewhere in Mercester lay a man who dug too deep. As they left the guest house, Agatha muttered, "I knew that waistcoat meant trouble." And though she didn't say it aloud, she also knew this murder had only just begun to unravel, much like Charles's dignity usually did under pressure. "Don't say it," Agatha warned as Charles opened his mouth in the back of Bill's car. The man had been composing dramatic remarks all the way to Mercester, and Agatha's nerves were frayed. "I wasn't going to say anything," Charles replied, wounded. "I was only reflecting that murder scenes do nothing for my digestion." Bill gave him a weary glance in the rearview mirror. "Let's not call it murder until we're certain." "Oh, Bill, don't be dull," Agatha snapped. "Men who vanish after shouting matches don't trip over daisies." Bill didn't answer. The patrol car turned onto a narrow lane flanked by hedgerows tall enough to intimidate livestock. A cluster of officers stood beside a low wooden footbridge, their uniforms stark against the pale afternoon light. Agatha felt a prickle of tension, not fear, never fear, but something close enough for her pride to deny. They parked. Bill held up a hand. "Agatha, remember you're not officially involved." She marched past him. "I'm always officially involved." Charles groaned. "Please don't antagonize the police." "I don't antagonize," Agatha said. "I clarify." The scene was deceptively peaceful, a small stream trickling under the footbridge, birdsong drifting from the hedges, sunlight stretched in thin golden blades across the grass, but the body beside the hedge robbed the place of any rural charm. Edmund Prowse lay on his side, limbs arranged too neatly, as though someone had tidied him like an unruly shop display. Agatha stopped a few paces away. She wasn't squeamish. She'd seen death before, but the stillness of Prowse unsettled her. He seemed smaller in death, folded in on himself, the pompous air stripped away. Bill approached the constable in charge. "Any sign of his coat?" "No, sir," the constable replied. "Odd that. You'd think a man going out at night would wear one." Agatha crouched just enough to examine his shoes. "Look at this mud," she murmured. "Too dark. This path is clay, more reddish. This mud's from somewhere else." Bill nodded. "We noticed. Could mean he crossed another field before ending up here." "Well, someone carried him," Agatha said. Charles blanched. "Must you be so grisly?" "Someone has to," she replied. A detective Agatha barely tolerated, Sergeant Wilkes approached with a clipboard. "Mrs. Raisin," he said with forced politeness, "you're not cleared to interfere." Agatha threw Bill a triumphant look. "He said interfere, not observe." Bill sighed. "Agatha, please." But she was already studying the body again. A constable lifted Prowse slightly so the forensic photographer could snap a shot. Something fluttered from his inner pocket. Agatha pounced with, "What's that?" Wilkes retrieved it. A slip of paper with 3 names. Agatha snatched her reading glasses from her handbag, one of the few times she'd used them without vanity kicking up dust, and read aloud. "Fraith, Lydia March, H. Colstone," and one's crossed out. "Why Lydia March?" Charles blinked. "Who on earth is Lydia March?" Agatha bristled. A ghastly newcomer. Insufferable woman. She said my hedges looked urban. Urban. Imagine implying my hedges belong in Birmingham. Bill hid a smile. "Agatha, this isn't personal." "It is now," she declared. "Why is her name on this?" Wilkes reached for the paper. "Evidence, Mrs. Raisin." She let him take it, but kept her glare fixed. Lydia March hated Prowse. "I doubt she even knew him," Bill said patiently. "She hated me," Agatha countered. "And spite is a powerful emotion." Charles folded his arm. "Spite doesn't usually lead to homicide." "Speak for yourself," Agatha muttered. A forensic officer approached Bill. "No weapon found. No signs of a struggle. Could be he fell from the footbridge." Agatha strode to the bridge. "Nonsense. Look at the moss. It's slippery, but Prowse was careful. He moved like a man worried about creasing his trousers. He wouldn't go climbing railings." Bill joined her. "Someone could have pushed him." "Someone did push him," Agatha said. "Look how tidy he is. Like they placed him, not dumped him." Charles shuddered. "I came here for reassurance, not horror." "You came here because your family tree is trying to murder you," Agatha snapped. Bill held up a calming hand. "Let's focus. There are details to record." They stepped aside while officers continued working. Mrs. Bloxby arrived quietly, guided by a constable who recognised her as the village vicar's wife. Even death scenes softened around her. She approached Agatha with a gentle composure that would have impressed marble. "Poor man," she said softly. Agatha nodded. "I didn't like him, but he didn't deserve this." Mrs. Bloxby studied the body with calm sorrow. "People like Mr. Prouse often meddle in histories they don't fully understand. It can stir desperation." Agatha frowned. "You think he manipulated someone?" "Not intentionally, perhaps, but genealogies dig up old wounds." Agatha crossed her arms. "He dug up something dangerous, whatever it was." Bill rejoined them. "They'll remove the body soon. I'm heading back to the station." "Good," Agatha said, "because I'm going to assist the police." Bill exhaled so dramatically a constable glanced over in concern. "Agatha." "Don't bother," she said. "I've already decided." Charles cleared his throat. "Before you start interrogating innocents in the street, might we reassess? This is my reputation on the line." Agatha gave him an incredulous look. "Your reputation? A man is dead, and your concern is whether Evesham society will whisper behind your back." "Of course they'll whisper," Charles retorted. "They whisper when I buy vinegar." Mrs. Bloxby intervened. "Perhaps we should all take a moment. Emotions are high." "Yes," Charles said. "Agatha is in full battle mode." Agatha bristled. "If I'm in battle mode, it's because someone murdered a man connected to your inheritance scandal." Charles paled. "Don't use those words together." Mrs. Bloxby gently touched Agatha's arm. "Let Bill do his work. You have a sharp instinct, but even you must rest." Agatha knew the advice was sensible and hated it. "Fine, but I'm not leaving this alone. Someone knows more." They watched as officers covered Prouse's body and lifted him onto a stretcher. The pale afternoon light made everything look oddly staged, as though the countryside were performing tragedy with too tidy props. As they walked back to the car, Agatha noticed something near the hedge, a small indentation in the ground, too deep for a fox, too neat for random wildlife. She crouched. "What now?" Charles asked. "A footprint," Agatha murmured. "Small, probably a woman. Lydia March?" Bill shook his head. "You're leaping again." "She's on the list," Agatha snapped. "Many people are on lists," Bill said gently. "Telephone directories, for example." Agatha stomped away. They returned to Carsley in strained silence. Charles insisted they regroup at his estate, though Agatha suspected he simply didn't want to be alone with his imagination. Mrs. Bloxby accompanied them, calm as a Sunday hymn. Barfield House looked almost cheerful against the fading light, its honey-stone walls glowing softly, but the tension inside soured the charm. Charles's butler approached. "A fax arrived for you, sir." Charles blinked. "A fax? Who even sends faxes anymore?" Agatha snatched it before he could hesitate. "Someone who wants to be anonymous." The sheet was crisp, a clean photocopy. Too clean. Agatha read it and felt the blood drain from her cheeks. "Charles," she said slowly, "did you sign an inheritance waiver years ago?" "What?" he cried. "No!" Mrs. Bloxby leaned in. "What does it say?" Agatha handed it to Charles. He read it aloud, voice shaking. "I, Charles Edmund Fraith, being of sound mind, do hereby acknowledge and relinquish claim to any contested inheritance should evidence substantiate a competing heir." Agatha stared at him. "Did you sign this?" "Of course not," Charles exploded. "That's not my signature. It looks like it was traced by a drunken spider." Mrs. Bloxby examined it. "It does seem off." Charles paced. "Someone forged this. Someone wants to ruin me. And Prouse had the original documents." Agatha felt a chill, not of fear but of certainty. Someone sent this to provoke panic. She looked at Charles. And someone else murdered Prouse. The room grew still. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Agatha folded her arms. Whoever did this is still out there, and they're not finished. Charles slumped onto a chair, pale and rattled. Mrs. Bloxby murmured something soothing, but Agatha hardly heard her. This mystery wasn't about genealogy. It was about ambition and secrets that refused to stay buried. Agatha strode to the window, glaring at the fading light. "Well," she muttered, "let them try. I'm not done either." Behind her, the fax machine whirred softly, as if adding its own quiet warning. "If this archivist is useless," Agatha announced as Charles pulled his convertible into the narrow parking bay, "I am not above shaking sense into him." "You will do no such thing," Charles replied, removing his gloves with aristocratic disdain. "We're here to make inquiries, not threats." Agatha sniffed. "You make inquiries your way. I make progress." They stepped into the modest stone library of Morton-in-Marsh, where the air smelled of dust, old bindings, and the faint despair of underfunding. A sign near the counter read, "Local history requests must be booked in advance." Agatha ignored it with contempt. A thin, pale man emerged from behind the shelves, blinking as though light offended him. "Mr. Wilton," he croaked, hands fluttering near his shirt collar. "Archivist. May I help you?" "We're here about the sealed Fraith packet," Agatha said briskly. Wilton's Adam's apple bobbed in terror. "Oh dear. Oh no. You can't simply... well, there are procedures." "That's why we came," Charles said with weary charm. "We'd like to go through the proper channels." Agatha shot him a glare. "No, we wouldn't. We're asking questions about a murder." Wilton staggered back. "Murder?" "Yes," Agatha said. "A genealogist poking about in your archive ended up dead. Now stop quivering and tell us if he accessed the Fraith letters." Wilton's face drained of colour. "I never gave him permission. Never. I wouldn't risk losing my position. Heritage is sacred." Agatha folded her arms. "Then how did he know about the sealed packet?" Wilton wrung his hands like damp laundry. "I told no one, not even my assistant. Oh dear, oh my, this is dreadful." Charles eased forward. "Has the archive been disturbed recently?" Wilton hesitated. "There was an attempt. The locked case showed signs of tampering 2 nights ago. I blamed my assistant for misplacing the keys, but she swore she hadn't touched them." Agatha snapped to attention. "Tampering? Show us." Reluctantly, Wilton led them along a side corridor into a small heritage room. A glass case sat against the wall, its lock scratched and bent. Agatha crouched immediately. "These scratches aren't from a key," she said. "Someone tried prying it open with a tool, badly." Charles crouched beside her, grimacing at the dusty floor. "Amateur work. I'd expect better criminals." She pointed to a small series of shallow dents in the wood. "Look at these impressions. They're triangular." Wilton placed a trembling hand against his mouth. "Should I call the police?" "Bill already knows we're here," Agatha said. "But these dents, they match something." She thought of Lila Pike's nervous fidgeting and the sharp triangular taps on her cheap shoes. But she kept the thought to herself. Lila was too timid to break into an archive. Probably. Wilton fumbled with the bent lock and opened the case. Inside lay several folders, brittle envelopes, and a small packet wrapped in yellowing paper secured with twine. "That's it," Charles whispered. "The sealed Fraith packet." Agatha seized it before Wilton's trembling could knock it to the floor. She unwrapped the twine carefully and unfolded the brittle paper. Inside were several handwritten letters in fading ink. Mrs. Bloxby had once told her that history reveals more about the living than the dead. Agatha wasn't sure she agreed, but she felt a stirring of curiosity as she read. The letters described a rumoured illegitimate child born in 1918, the result of a wartime liaison between a Fraith cousin and an unnamed woman, scandalous enough to be buried. But the packet was missing something. "The envelope naming the mother isn't here," Agatha said. "Someone removed it." Charles's face twisted. "That envelope is the entire point. It names the heir." Wilton moaned. "I knew this would be trouble. I warned my assistant we should move the collection, but she said the shelves were quite secure. Oh dear, oh dear." Agatha eyed him with suspicion. "You seem terribly nervous, Mr. Wilton." He gulped. "I always seem nervous." "He does," Charles confirmed. "Look at him. He's a teacup filled with tremors." Wilton nodded miserably. "I've been very anxious lately. My assistant misplaced 3 diaries from the early 19th century. 3. I've hardly slept." Agatha frowned. A guilty conscience from misfiling books. Hardly murder behaviour. He was a red herring draped in cardigans. She leafed through the remaining letters. Well, whoever took the envelope knew exactly what they were after. Charles paced the room. "This means someone had access before Prowse ever asked for permission. Someone here." Wilton nearly swooned. "I shall faint." "Don't," Agatha said. "You'll dent the carpet." A noise startled them, a book thudding onto the floor. For a moment, Wilton looked ready to summon the police, the fire brigade, and possibly a priest. But Agatha simply picked it up. "Latin title," she said, squinting. "Familia antiqua in... oh, never mind. Family something." She tried to pronounce the next word with scholarly confidence. It came out like a cough tangled in a sneeze. Charles doubled over laughing. "Good grief, Agatha. It's in Britannia." "I knew that," she said hotly. "I was merely testing your intelligence." He wheezed. "Well, I passed. Barely." Even Wilton looked faintly amused, though it appeared to pain him deeply. Agatha thrust the book back onto a shelf. "Let's get back to business. Mr. Wilton, who else has a key to this case?" "Only me," he said. "Well, me and my assistant. But she's frightfully honest. Too honest, really. She once returned a library fine that wasn't hers out of moral unease." "Then she's out," Agatha muttered. "Anyone else know where the key is kept?" "No," Wilton said quickly. Then, more uncertainly, "At least I don't think so." Agatha shook her head. "Hopeless." Charles tapped his chin. The letters hint at a child who'd have been in their 80s by now. But if they had children of their own... "The inheritance widens," Agatha finished, "which gives motive." "For Prowse to dig," Charles said, "and for someone to silence him." Wilton whimpered at the word silence. Agatha carefully rewrapped the sealed packet and returned it to the case. "We're done here. For now." Wilton grabbed the edge of his desk for support. "I hope this doesn't reflect poorly on my competency." "Don't worry," Charles said. "Your competency was already in question." Wilton made a sound like a deflating kettle. Agatha and Charles headed out through the lobby. Agatha turned the details over in her mind. The triangular marks, the missing envelope, the letters hinting at a scandal buried for decades. Progress, yes, but maddeningly incomplete. When they stepped outside, the fresh air felt almost shocking after the library's gloom. A row of shops lined the street. A bakery, a charity shop, a florist. Agatha spotted movement near the florist, 2 figures in heated conversation. She grabbed Charles's arm. "Look!" Gavin Trent, the flashy Londoner from Prowse's lodging house, stood with Lydia March, the sharp-tongued woman who had once insulted Agatha's hedges. Lydia looked furious. Gavin looked delighted by her fury. Agatha crept closer. Charles followed reluctantly. They stopped behind a parked van, close enough to hear the last of the exchange. "You promised it would only be intimidation," Lydia hissed, "not murder." Agatha froze. Gavin lifted both palms innocently. "I promised nothing of the sort. You're the one who brought money into it." Lydia's face twisted. "I won't be dragged into this." "You already are," Gavin said, smirking. Agatha's heart quickened. "Lydia March? Intimidation? Money?" Gavin's smug tone suggested mischief of the worst kind. She nudged Charles. "Did you hear that?" "I'm not deaf," he whispered. Agatha felt vindicated and alarmed. Lydia March had a temper sharp enough to slice fruit, but murder? Still, her name had been on Prowse's list. And now this. Before Agatha could march over and demand answers, Gavin turned and spotted her watching. His smirk widened into a dazzling grin. "Mrs. Raisin? Fancy seeing you here." Lydia spun, eyes wide with guilt, then fled down the street, nearly knocking over a toddler. Gavin winked. "You do get around." Agatha stared at him, pulse thrumming. "We need a word." He smiled as though invited to tea. Delighted. But Agatha wasn't delighted. She felt the prick of something deeper, suspicion tightening around a knot she couldn't yet untangle. Charles murmured, "This is becoming complicated." Agatha squared her shoulders. "Complicated is my specialty." Yet even as she spoke, a quiet unease curled beneath her confidence. That overheard sentence lodged in her mind like a thorn. Only intimidation, not murder. Someone had lied, someone had panicked, and someone had crossed a line that was supposed to remain hypothetical. As Agatha turned back toward the car, she muttered, "This business is uglier than Wilton's jumpers." Charles nodded grimly. "And twice as itchy." They started walking, but Agatha felt the weight of the missing envelope, the forged waiver, and the building tension closing in. Secrets were piling up faster than castly gossip after a fate, and someone out there wanted them to stay buried. Still, she thought, straightening her coat, secrets rarely remained buried for long, not when Agatha Raisin was digging. And somewhere back in Castley, Hodge would be stretched smugly across her favourite chair, waiting for trouble to arrive home safely, as it always somehow did. "Don't start," Agatha warned the moment Mrs. Josephs opened her mouth in the village shop. Unfortunately, Mrs. Josephs believed gossip to be a sacred calling. "I wasn't starting," she said, though her eyes gleamed. "I was only saying that Sir Charles Fraith looked very pale driving through the village, pale as milk. Never a good sign in a gentleman. Usually means guilt." Agatha slapped her basket onto the counter. "He is not guilty. He is overwhelmed." Mrs. Josephs leaned closer. "Overwhelmed people don't go round murdering genealogists, dear." Agatha's eyebrows shot up. "Neither does Charles." The dozen customers queuing behind her, fortified by scones and scandal, drank in every word. Carsley did not need newspapers. It had a population armed with tongues and free time. Mrs. Bloxby appeared at Agatha's side, angelic as ever. Now, she soothed. "Let's not leap to grim conclusions. There's no proof Charles did anything wrong." Mrs. Joseph sniffed. "If there's no proof, Agatha will find some. She always does." Agatha turned scarlet. She adored attention, just not this kind. "I investigate to help people," she snapped, "not to condemn them." A young mother behind her chirped, "Well, my husband says the Fraith estate's been cursed since the 60s. Says something bad was bound to happen." Agatha swung round. "Your husband also thinks diseased mushrooms cured his aunt's rheumatism." Mrs. Bloxby touched her elbow gently. "Agatha, dear, there's no need." But there was every need. By the time she escaped the shop, the entire village had updated its collective narrative to "Agatha Raisin defends Charles Fraith with suspicious passion." She stalked down the lane, fuming. At the post office, the same atmosphere awaited. Whispers, raised brows, and that self-righteous tone villagers used when pretending to care deeply about justice. Mrs. Barnes, behind the counter, piped up. "Terrible business about that poor man Prowse, and Sir Charles being dragged into it. Such a shame." Agatha forced a tight smile. "He isn't dragged into anything." "Of course not," Mrs. Barnes replied, nodding vigorously. "Until he is." Agatha left before she threw a bundle of second-class envelopes at someone. By mid-morning, she sought refuge at the vicarage bake counter, where Mrs. Bloxby assisted two parish ladies arranging cakes. The vicarage kitchen smelled of warm sponge and quiet judgment, the smell of spiritual companionship. But even here, gossip lurked. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin," cried Mrs. Wendell breathlessly. "I heard Sir Charles was questioned by police all morning." "He was not," Agatha said sharply. "He's at his estate, panicking into expensive furniture." Mrs. Bloxby gave her a soft smile. "He is distressed." "Distressed is Charles's natural state," Agatha muttered. Mrs. Wendell leaned closer. "Did he do it?" "No!" Agatha barked so loudly a tray of fairy cakes wobbled. Mrs. Bloxby stepped in with her signature gentleness. "Agatha, dear, perhaps a cup of tea?" "Yes," Agatha said, "before someone else decides Charles committed high treason." She had barely taken one sip when Lydia March swept into the vicarage hall like a storm in designer boots. "You," Lydia snapped at Agatha. "We need to talk." Agatha blinked. "I'm busy." Lydia planted herself in front of her. "You listened to that London ghoul yesterday. He lies. I never said anything about murder." "Funny," Agatha said, "because you were overheard arguing with Prowse before he died." Lydia huffed. "I shouted at him because he stole my money. He was supposed to confirm my noble lineage." Agatha choked on her tea. "Your what?" "My noble lineage," Lydia repeated, icy. "My grandmother always said we came from good breeding." Mrs. Bloxby hid a smile behind a napkin. "So, what happened?" Agatha asked. "Prowse told me he'd found evidence I was descended from a gentry family," Lydia said. "I gave him £200 for documentation. Then he produced some ridiculous photocopy of a child born out of wedlock in 1918. Hardly noble, we argued. That is all." "And the phrase, 'intimidation, not murder'?" Agatha asked sweetly. Lydia blanched. "He promised to pressure someone for information. I told him to be gentle. He said he wasn't a charity worker. That is all." Agatha studied her. Lydia March was vain enough to kill for flattery, but not vain enough to commit homicide. "Fine," Agatha said reluctantly, "but I'm watching you." "You always are," Lydia snapped, flouncing out. Mrs. Bloxby sighed. "She seems frightened." "She seems guilty," Agatha muttered, "of being tiresome," as they stepped outside into the churchyard. Agatha spotted another problem. Gavin Trent, leaning against the lich gate with a swagger that belonged in a London nightclub, not a Cotswold parish. "Agatha," he cried, lighting up as though cameras awaited. "I've uncovered something explosive." "I doubt it," she said. He flourished a notebook full of dramatic scribbles. "Prowse confided in me that he was about to publish a scandal about Sir Charles. He hinted Charles bribed him to bury details." Agatha grabbed the notebook. The notes were melodramatic, vague, and suspiciously written in identical handwriting. "This is rubbish," she said. "Colourful rubbish," Gavin corrected. "Fabricated rubbish," Agatha snapped. Gavin winked. "It'll still sell." She resisted the urge to throttle him. "We're solving a murder, not pitching a tabloid." "Oh, but everything is a pitch," he said airily. "Even truth." He sauntered off before she could retort, leaving Agatha seething. Mrs. Bloxby laid a calm hand on her arm. "Perhaps he only wants attention." "He can have attention," Agatha said, "preferably from a speeding tractor." But beneath her annoyance simmered something sharper. The village had turned on Charles with alarming enthusiasm, and someone out there was manipulating every whisper. Agatha returned home intending to regroup and plan interrogations, but found Doris Simpson waiting in her garden, arms folded, lips tight. "What now?" Agatha sighed. "A word," Doris said firmly. "Private." Agatha ushered her inside. Hodge sat on the kitchen counter, licking crumbs from a plate he had absolutely not been permitted to climb near. "Off," Agatha ordered. Hodge responded by sitting down more firmly. Doris lowered her voice. "I saw someone behind your cottage last night. A woman. Dropped something into your dustbin." Agatha's pulse jumped. "Who?" "It was dark," Doris said, "but she wore a jacket with a hood. Moved quick, like she didn't want anyone seeing." Agatha hurried to the back door, Doris following. She lifted the dustbin lid. Something bulky, mud-streaked and miserable sat inside. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha muttered. "Hodge, get back!" Too late. Hodge launched himself into the bin with heroic enthusiasm, vanishing among the rubbish. A moment later, he re-emerged covered in tea bags, vegetable peelings, and the detached dignity of a cat betrayed by gravity. "You silly creature," Agatha cried. "Why did you jump in?" Hodge gave her a look that suggested because it was there. Doris stifled a laugh. "He's fine." Agatha sniffed and gingerly retrieved the object from the bin. A men's coat. Muddy, heavy, torn at the sleeve. Her breath caught. "This is Prowse's coat," Doris nodded. "Thought it looked familiar." Agatha turned it over. The lining was intact, the pockets full of lint, and something small pressed against the fabric. She reached in. Her fingers closed around a cold metal object. A key. Brass. Old. With a tiny tag attached. She held it up. "CF. Cabinet. Charles Fraith. Cabinet." Agatha stared at it. Charles's late father had owned a writing cabinet so old and ornate even burglars avoided touching it for fear of dust allergies. The cabinet had been locked for years, and Charles had never found the key, until now. Mrs. Bloxby, who had followed them quietly through the garden gate, spoke softly. "This looks significant." Agatha's mind raced. Someone had placed Prowse's coat in her bin. Someone wanted her to find this. Someone wanted a message delivered. She turned to Doris. "Did the woman have long hair, short, tall, short, a limp?" "Agatha," Doris said patiently. "It was dark." Agatha cursed inwardly. "Why dump it here? Why not somewhere anonymous?" "Because," Mrs. Bloxby said gently, "they wanted to avoid suspicion, and they know you would examine anything left for you." Agatha did not know whether to feel flattered or manipulated. She wiped bin residue from her hands. "I have to show this to Charles." "Yes," Mrs. Bloxby said, "but carefully. He's already rattled." Agatha marched toward the house, Hodge trotting behind her like a damp, offended footman. She placed the key on the kitchen table. Its brass surface caught the light with an innocent glint she did not trust. "Someone is playing a game," she muttered. Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "And they want you involved." Agatha couldn't tell whether that was encouraging or ominous, but she knew one thing. The cabinet at Barfield House now held answers, or detonations. Hodge jumped onto a chair and began washing bits of lettuce off his paws with determined dignity. The sight almost soothed her. Almost. Agatha took a deep breath. "Right. Time to rattle Charles's cage." and with the key lying between them like a challenge, the kettle gave a soft, wise sigh, as though it too sensed trouble brewing exactly where Agatha Raisin liked it best. "Stop fussing," Agatha said as Charles hovered near the locked writing cabinet like a man expecting it to explode. "It's a piece of furniture, not a bomb." "It is not furniture," Charles replied, affronted. "It is an heirloom. My father once refused to move it during redecorating because he said the cabinet had stronger opinions than my mother." Agatha rolled her eyes. "Just use the key." They were gathered in Charles's study, a warm, firelit room with old books, antlers of questionable taste, and a carpet so deep Hodge would have lost a battle with it. Mrs. Bloxby sat gracefully on a small sofa, hands folded, watching with gentle curiosity. "You're sure this key fits?" Charles asked. Agatha thrust it toward him. "Try it before I do it for you." He gave her a wounded look but inserted the key. The lock, untouched for years, clicked open with surprising ease. "There," Agatha said. "The universe isn't conspiring against you. Yet." Charles opened the cabinet doors. Inside lay several folders, their edges yellowed with age. The room felt suddenly quieter, as though the cabinet held its breath after a long silence. He pulled out a thin folder tied with ribbon. "My father labelled everything," he murmured. "This must be related to the family estate." Agatha leaned over his shoulder. "Open it." Charles unfolded the ribbon with ceremonial reverence. Inside lay letters, most on fragile stationery, neat but faded. Mrs. Bloxby rose and approached. "May I?" "Of course," Charles said, handing her a page. Agatha took another letter. "This one's dated 1974, she said. "Something about the matter we agreed to bury for the family's peace. Sounds thrilling." Charles winced. "My family does love melodrama." Agatha read further. "This part says there was a child born to a Fraith cousin during the war. Best kept out of inheritance discussions." She paused. "This sounds like confirmation of a secret heir." Mrs. Bloxby, still reading her letter, tilted her head. "The handwriting feels odd." "Odd," Charles repeated. "Father always wrote like a man carving his signature into stone tablets." Mrs. Bloxby held the letter to the light. The strokes wobble, and there are faint impressions beneath the ink, as though someone traced over original text. Agatha frowned. "A forgery?" "Not necessarily the full page," Mrs. Bloxby said, "but parts may be altered. The indentations run differently from the natural pen pressure." Agatha laid her letter flat and inspected the edges. "And the paper is slightly newer than the envelope suggests. Thinner. Someone slipped forged content into an old folder." Charles paled. "You mean someone wanted me, or someone else, to find a fake confirmation of a hidden heir?" "Or wanted Proust to find it," Agatha said. "He would have loved a scandal he could sell." Charles pressed his fingers to his temples. "This is a nightmare." Agatha patted his arm. "Yes, but at least it's yours and not mine." He glared at her. A sudden crash sounded from the corridor, followed by a dramatic voice. "Charles, darling, why wasn't I told about the murder?" Charles groaned. "Dear God, not Hector." Hector Fraith swept into the study wearing a coat that belonged on a theatre stage and cologne strong enough to fumigate the room. "I rushed from London the moment I heard," he declared. "Family tragedy must be met with family unity." Agatha coughed pointedly. "And family theatrics, apparently." Hector beamed. "Mrs. Raisin, I've heard so much about you." Agatha preened instinctively before catching herself. "Mostly lies, I'm sure." He took her hand. "If they were lies, they were flattering. Do you tango?" Charles snapped. "Hector, stop flirting with my acquaintance." "Acquaintance?" Agatha said sharply. Hector looked delighted. "Touchy. How marvellous." Mrs. Bloxby stepped in diplomatically. "We were examining old letters. Perhaps you know something of the Fraith history." Hector threw himself into a chair. "Only that our dear family has every reason to hide an illegitimate heir. Imagine the drama. I wish I'd found one myself." Charles looked ready to strangle him. "You're not helping." Hector shrugged. "I didn't come to help. I came to enjoy." Agatha ignored him and returned to the cabinet. A second shallow drawer sat beneath the folder compartment. She slid it open. Inside lay loose papers, contracts, receipts, and a draft template for inheritance agreements. She lifted the template and froze. On the bottom corner was a faint triangular indentation. Her pulse quickened. "Charles, look." He leaned over. "What is that?" "A mark," Agatha said. "See? Triangle-shaped, exactly like the dent we saw near the archive break-in." Mrs. Bloxby stepped closer. "You're right, the same shape." Agatha straightened. This cabinet was accessed recently. Someone wearing shoes with triangular metal taps prized it open. Charles inhaled sharply. But who has such ridiculous footwear? Agatha felt her memory click. Lila Pike. Charles blinked. "My housemaid." "She had triangular taps on her heels," Agatha said. "I noticed them when she eavesdropped at Barfield House, and again when she almost tripped over my foot." Mrs. Bloxby looked troubled. But why would she break into the archive, and again into the cabinet? Agatha paced the room. She must have overheard something. Maybe Prowse mentioned the sealed packet. Maybe she snooped in his room. Maybe she wanted money. Hector sipped an imaginary cocktail. Blackmail is very in fashion. "Do shut up," Charles snapped. Agatha held up the indentation-marked contract. "Someone with Lila's shoes accessed this cabinet, and someone slipped forged letters into this folder." Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "It is possible she was pressured by someone else." Hector gasped dramatically. "Charles, do you mean I could be implicated? How delicious!" "You're implicated in being insufferable," Agatha muttered. Charles pinched the bridge of his nose. "Let's speak to Lila before this spirals further." They marched toward the servants' wing, Agatha leading with purposeful strides. Charles followed reluctantly, muttering about boundaries. Hector trailed behind, humming a show tune. Mrs. Bloxby brought up the rear, serene as always. Agatha knocked once on Lila's door. No answer. She knocked again, harder. "Lila, we need a word." Still nothing. Charles sighed. "She's probably in the laundry room." Agatha pushed the door open. The room was spotless. Too spotless. The bed was neatly made, the surfaces wiped bare. The wardrobe doors stood open. Inside hung nothing but a wire hanger. Agatha stepped in, scanning every corner. "Where are her clothes?" "Gone," Charles said, horrified. "Her suitcase? Gone too." Mrs. Bloxby folded her hands. She left in a hurry. Agatha approached the small bedside table. Only a dent in the dust suggested something had once sat there, perhaps a handbag or diary. "She's run," Agatha said. "Someone scared her enough to leave, and she's afraid of getting caught. She knows we're closing in." Hector clasped his hands dramatically. "Oh, how thrilling!" Agatha rounded on him. "Thrilling? A girl is missing, possibly endangered." Hector pursed his lips. "Well, yes, but it's still awfully exciting." Charles stepped forward, troubled. Lila was timid, hardly the mastermind behind forged letters. Agatha nodded. "Which means someone used her. She broke into the archive and this cabinet for someone else." Mrs. Bloxby's voice was gentle. "And now that someone wants her out of the way." The words chilled Agatha. She glanced around the room once more. No notes, no receipts, no clues. Until she spotted a faint indentation on the carpet near the window. She knelt. Footprint, larger than Lila's. Charles blinked. "A man?" "Likely," Agatha said. "Someone came here, recently." Mrs. Bloxby's brow furrowed. "Before or after she packed?" Agatha rose slowly. "That's the question." Hector peered out of the window. "Do you think she left voluntarily?" "No," Agatha said. "Lila was frightened of losing her job. She wouldn't bolt without speaking to someone, especially not without her wages." Charles swallowed. "So she was taken?" Mrs. Bloxby touched his arm gently. "Not necessarily taken, perhaps pressured." Agatha nodded. "But someone visited this room before we got here." Hector clapped his hands. "A villain in our midst." Agatha glared at him. "If you don't shut up, you will be in our midst only as a chalk outline." He grinned. Charles turned toward Agatha. "What do we do now?" Agatha looked at the empty wardrobe, the faint footprint, the open door. "We find Lila," she said, "and we find out who used her." She stepped back into the corridor. Someone forged a letter. Someone accessed the archive. Someone slipped something into Prowse's coat before dumping it in my bin. And someone frightened Lila enough to make her vanish. Charles paled. "You think all of that is connected?" "Yes," Agatha said flatly. Mrs. Bloxby nodded. "The disappearance suggests escalation." Hector fanned himself with invisible feathers. Oh, how ghastly, and yet how exhilarating. Agatha ignored him and marched toward the main hall. We question everyone. Housemaids, gardeners, even that ridiculous valet of yours. Charles protested. He has done nothing wrong. He wears waistcoats with carnations, Agatha snapped. He's suspicious by definition. Mrs. Bloxby hid a smile. As they reached the staircase, Charles glanced back toward Lila's empty room. Agatha, what if she's in danger? Agatha softened slightly. Then we'll bring her back safe. But first we need to know where she went. And how she got out unseen, Mrs. Bloxby added. Agatha nodded. Someone helped her, or forced her. She did not say that part aloud. They reached the front hall. Hector was already admiring his reflection in a large gilt mirror. I look far too good for a crisis, he declared. Agatha muttered, not good enough to be quiet. But even as she led them toward the drawing room, toward lists, theories, and interrogation, her mind kept returning to Lila's room. A vanishing maid, a forged letter, a triangular heel mark, and someone pulling strings with clever, calculated hands. As they entered Charles's grand hall, Hodge wandered in from the garden, tail high, as though returning from adventures no one would ever fully understand. He brushed against Agatha's leg in greeting. She scratched his head absently. We'll sort this out, she murmured. Hodge purred, as confident as ever that Agatha Raisin would solve everything, even when she wasn't sure herself. Don't tell me to calm down, Agatha snapped as Bill Wong closed the file he'd brought to her cottage. My housemaid's vanished. Forged letters are turning up like confetti, and Charles is 3 sighs away from a melodramatic faint. I'm allowed a mood. Bill gave her a patient look. I didn't tell you to calm down. You were thinking it, Agatha retorted, pacing the living room. Hodge lay sprawled across her armchair like a languid emperor, one paw dangling over the side, watching them with faint disdain. Bill cleared his throat. Right. Let's begin with what we've learned about Lila Pike. Agatha stopped pacing. Or, as we now know, Lila Colstone. Bill opened the file again. Yes, her real surname matches the one on Prowse's list, H. Colstone. Her grandfather worked for the Fraith family decades ago. There were rumours he possessed letters about a forgotten branch of the family tree. Agatha felt a spark of satisfaction. So, she had motive. Maybe, Bill said, but not necessarily violent motive. Agatha frowned. You're protecting her. Why? She broke into an archive. Bill sighed. Agatha, half the suspects you've ever chased have broken into something, usually your kitchen. She huffed but did not argue. Bill continued. Her mother says Lila visited Prowse hoping he could confirm whether she might be connected to the Fraiths. Prowse told her the evidence existed, but he needed payment to verify it. Agatha clenched her fists. The man was a parasite. Agreed, Bill said. When Lila refused, they argued. She left. And that's the last her mother heard. Agatha slumped into a chair opposite Hodge. So she stormed off. That doesn't make her a murderer. Precisely, Bill said. And there's more. A villager claims Lila was often sneaking out at night. Agatha sat up. Sneaking out to stalk Prowse? No, Bill said. She left to use the phone box near the green. She was embarrassed about working as a maid and didn't want others overhearing her calls home. Agatha winced. That's actually rather sad. Bill nodded. She's a shy girl, terrified of disappointing people. But that doesn't mean someone couldn't have manipulated her. She could be pressured into doing something she never would have considered. Plenty of shy people become dangerous, Agatha argued. Look at that murderer from, what was the case? The one with the sheepdog and the poisoned scones. Quiet as a cloud until he tried to strangle me. Bill gave her a look. Agatha, you antagonized him. She sniffed. I antagonize everyone. They don't all attempt homicide. At that moment, Charles burst through the door without knocking, naturally, wearing an expression of aristocratic doom. Agatha, he said breathlessly, I've had a thought. Congratulations, she said. Does it hurt? He ignored her. If Lila truly wished to claim inheritance, she wouldn't run. She'd stay, demand proof, watch the scandal unfold. Why flee? Bill nodded. Exactly what I've been saying. Agatha glared. Yes, you're both very clever. Charles sank onto the sofa beside Hodge, who immediately shifted, offended. I'm worried, Charles admitted quietly. Agatha softened. She rarely heard sincerity from him without theatrics. "We'll find her." Bill closed his file. "There's another detail. Lila was spotted near Mercester Station the night Prowse died." Agatha leaned forward. "Wearing mud?" "No," Bill said. "Her shoes were clean. Very clean." Agatha blinked. "So she didn't walk near the footpath or hedgerow where we found Prowse?" "Correct," Bill said. Charles exhaled in relief. "Then she isn't involved." Agatha held up a hand. "She isn't involved in the murder, perhaps, but she is connected to something. Someone frightened her." Bill nodded slowly. "Yes, that I believe." Hodge chose that moment to jump onto Agatha's lap, shedding a small cloud of cat fur. She stroked him absently, mind racing. A knock sounded at her door. Agatha groaned. "If that is Gavin Trent, I swear I'll throttle him with my phone cord." She flung the door open, and indeed found Gavin Trent leaning smugly against the frame. "Agatha, darling," he declared, sweeping inside without invitation. "I bring news." "Leave," Agatha said, but Gavin flourished his notebook. "Rumour has it Lila murdered Prowse because he threatened to expose Charles. Delicious, isn't it?" Agatha stared at him. "No, it's ridiculous." Gavin winked. "I can make it plausible." Bill stepped forward. "Mr. Trent, spreading false information during a police investigation can be considered obstruction." Gavin wilted slightly. "Well, perhaps I'll just leave you to it." "Do that," Agatha snapped. He left in a flurry of indignation, muttering something about small-minded villages. Agatha slammed the door. "I cannot stand that man," Charles smirked. "He does seem fond of you." "Don't insult me," Agatha said, though a small part of her relished the idea of anyone being fond of her. Mrs. Bloxby arrived then, slipping into the living room with her usual softness. "I fear I'm intruding." "Not at all," Agatha said. "We need calm logic. Bill and Charles are hopeless." "That's fair," Charles conceded. Bill rolled his eyes. Mrs. Bloxby sat beside Agatha. "I've been thinking about Lila. A frightened girl will run towards someone she trusts." Agatha nodded. "Her mother?" "Possibly," Mrs. Bloxby said, "but Lila's mother said she hadn't heard from her." Agatha frowned. "Then someone else? Someone from her past? Someone who contacted her?" Bill tapped his folder. "She grew up near Northleach. Large family. Few connections to Castley." Agatha sighed. "We're missing something." Mrs. Bloxby reached into her handbag. "Perhaps this will help." She held out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Agatha unwrapped it and gasped. A silver button, delicate, ornate, embossed with the Fraith crest. "This was beneath a pew cushion after the church meeting," Mrs. Bloxby said softly. "Someone tugged at it recently. Hard." Charles stood quickly. "That's from a Fraith coat. My father had them custom made. So did my cousin Hector." Agatha stared at the button, feeling a steady pulse of importance thrum through her thoughts. Charles took it reverently. "This is from one of my old coats. I haven't worn it in ages." Bill crossed his arms. "Could someone have taken your coat, Charles?" Charles looked insulted. "Who would dare?" Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Anyone with hands and opportunity." Mrs. Bloxby frowned. "If a Fraith coat was involved, someone wearing it may have been near the pew, and possibly near Prowse." Agatha rose from her seat. "Someone wants the Fraith family implicated. That's why Charles's signature appeared forged on the inheritance waiver. That's why Prowse fixated on Fraith documents. That's why Lila, a Colstone descendant, was dragged into this web." Bill nodded. "Someone is orchestrating a narrative." Charles's shoulders slumped. "And I'm the villain of their story." Agatha placed a hand on his arm. "Not if I stop them." He met her eyes. "Do you think Lila knows who it is?" "Yes," Agatha said, "but she's terrified." Bill frowned. "Which means whoever frightened her is confident, experienced." "And probably male," Agatha added. "Footprint in her room was large." Charles blinked. "My valet wears large shoes." Agatha sighed. "Everyone wears large shoes in the country. Mud requires practical footwear." Hodge meowed pointedly, batting at the silver button. Agatha scooped it away. "Not a toy." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "He seems to disagree." Agatha focused. "The button was torn recently, either during a struggle or hasty undressing." Charles choked. "Agatha!" She ignored him. "Someone tore it off while escaping, hiding, or confronting Prowse." Bill leaned forward. But where does Lila fit? Agatha thought. Lila visited Prouse earlier. They argued. She stormed out. Someone else approached him that night. Someone wearing a Fraith coat. Someone who manipulated Lila into breaking into the archive and Charles's cabinet. Charles whispered, "Someone close." Agatha nodded. Someone who knew the archives, the cabinet, the Fraith history, someone who could forge letters convincingly. Hector entered her mind, but the idea collapsed instantly. Hector could barely forge a shopping list. Agatha sighed. We need more information, and we need Lila. Bill opened his folder again. I've put out quiet inquiries. Train staff at Mercester recall seeing her, but not boarding. She asked about onward connections. Agatha perked up. To where? Bill checked. Cheltenham, and one inquiry about Gloucester. Agatha snapped her fingers. She was fleeing, but undecided. Mrs. Bloxby gave a small nod. And frightened. Charles spoke softly. Agatha, what if she's running from someone in my family? Agatha hesitated. We can't rule it out. Charles looked stricken. She softened. But we also haven't ruled out villagers, Hector's ridiculous London acquaintances, or Gavin Trent trying to stage his own murder mystery feature. Bill smirked. Gavin doesn't have the brain power to stage toast. Agatha exhaled, pacing again. So, here's what we know. Lila Colstone is not our killer. She's scared. She's running. Someone used her. Someone wants to frame Charles. And someone wearing a Fraith coat left this button behind. Mrs. Bloxby offered a thoughtful smile. Buttons do have a tendency to lead places. Agatha considered this. Mrs. Bloxby had solved more crimes with gentle metaphors than most detectives with full training. She picked up the silver button. Then I'll follow this one. Hodge stretched luxuriously, as though approving her determination, then curled into her warm chair, purring like a small, furry engine. The kettle on the hob clicked as it cooled, giving a soft, domestic sigh that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in Agatha's thoughts. Yes, she murmured, we'll find her. But beneath her growing resolve lay a colder truth. Someone else was counting on Agatha Raisin to follow the trail, and they were waiting. Agatha held the silver button aloft as if it were a royal decree rather than a misplaced fastening. Well, she declared, this proves something. I've no idea what, but something. She rather enjoyed the dramatic flourish, though Charles looked pale enough to faint. It's a Fraith crest, he muttered. Not widely used. Only a few coats had them, my father's, and Harold Colstone's. He said the last name quickly, as if hoping no one would notice. Bill, of course, noticed at once. Harold Colstone, your father's solicitor? Yes, Charles sighed. Old family retainer. Terribly dull. His son runs an antique shop in Mercester. Henry, equally dull. He pointed helplessly at the button. He must have lost this years ago. Agatha tapped the crest. But this one is shiny, freshly broken off. Someone's been flinging themselves about in their Sunday best. Charles winced. Please don't imply my relatives fling themselves. They only glide. Bill ignored him, studying the button with quiet intensity. We should speak to Henry Colstone. He might confirm where this came from. Agatha already had her coat on. Then let's go before Charles talks us all out of it. Honestly, you'd think we were accusing you of murdering the Queen's corgi. Charles sniffed. I resent the implication. I adore corgis. The drive to Mercester was mercifully short. Charles kept rearranging his collar, a sure sign he feared embarrassment. Agatha pretended not to enjoy it. Henry Colstone's antique shop sat wedged between a florist and a shop selling expensive candles. The window display featured chipped porcelain shepherdesses and a dismal-looking grandfather clock that ticked like a guilty conscience. Inside, Henry himself appeared, a slim, pale man in a tailored waistcoat that did not match his anxious eyes. He smiled too quickly, as if hoping politeness might erase decades of inherited secrets. Lord Fraith, he said, bowing slightly. A pleasure. And Agatha Raisin, isn't it? I've heard much about you. His tone suggested he wasn't sure whether it was admiration or warning. Agatha stepped forward, brandishing the silver button like evidence in a courtroom drama. Recognize this? Henry blinked. I might. You might? Agatha repeated. Either it's Fraith or it's not. Don't be coy. Charles cut in. Henry, Did you ever have a coat with these buttons? Henry hesitated. My father did. I inherited it. Though it hasn't fit me since, well, ever. Bill's tone was gentle but firm. Has anyone else had access to your father's things? Henry looked cornered. Perhaps. It's been years. I don't keep track of every visitor. Agatha's eyes drifted across the shop and froze. On the desk behind Henry sat a pair of men's shoes, well polished and unmistakably adorned with triangular metal heel taps. She nudged Bill sharply. Bill coughed to hide a muttered, "Blimey." Charles merely groaned. Henry followed their gaze and coloured. They're vintage, he protested weakly. Authentic Edwardian heel taps. Authentically identical, Agatha said, to the marks left at the library break-in, and at Charles's cabinet. Henry sank into a chair as though he'd been waiting for permission. All right. I broke into the archive and into the cabinet, but I didn't kill anyone. Agatha folded her arms. Start talking, and make it good. Henry pressed his palms together, marshalling his thoughts. My grandmother always claimed we were robbed of a rightful inheritance. Harold Colstone served Lord Fraith loyally, yes, but family whispers said the Fraith bloodline mixed with ours long ago. A child kept hidden, a scandal never admitted. Charles sighed heavily. Good grief, not another heir. Bill remained calm. So you wanted proof? Yes, Henry whispered. Prowse promised evidence, for a fee. When I refused to pay more, he threatened to expose me as a fraud. I panicked. I needed the sealed packet, or something to refute his claims. So you broke in? Agatha pressed. I tried, but Wilton at the library nearly caught me, and Charles's butler is terrifying. I grabbed nothing. Agatha frowned. But Prowse ended up dead. Did you meet him near the footpath? Henry nodded miserably. I did. He was furious. I'd looked through the Fraith documents. He pushed me. I stumbled and ran. I left him behind, alive but looking shaken. I swear it. I did not see him die. Bill watched him, weighing the confession. Why lie earlier about knowing Prowse? Henry's voice cracked. Because the man was a vulture, and I believed he'd use anything to ruin me. Agatha paced, gears turning. This is all very emotional, but it still doesn't tell us who killed him. Henry hesitated. There is one thing. Before I arrived at the footpath, I heard someone else shouting at Prowse. A man. Posh accent. Strong temper. Said something about ruining everything. Agatha froze. She knew that voice. She'd heard it at parties, in snubs, in moments of misguided chivalry. Charles's eyes widened. Agatha, don't say it. But she did not need to. They all knew only one man with temper, breeding, and enough melodramatic diction to qualify. Charles paled. It can't be Hector. He arrived after... After what? Agatha said sharply. After you told him about the scandal? After he smelled opportunity to stir up a family disgrace? Henry looked confused. Hector Fraith? He's harmless. That's debatable, Charles muttered. Bill stepped between them. Let's keep our heads. If Hector argued with Prowse, we need to verify when and why. Agatha nodded. Fine. But first, Henry, you owe us details about everything you heard. Henry took a deep, miserable breath. I only caught fragments. Something like, you said no one else knew, and I won't let you ruin my chances, that's all. Charles dropped into a seat, face in hands. Hector has been angling for decades to inflate his importance. If there's even a rumour of a hidden heir, he'll explode with excitement. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Or kill, to protect his claim. Charles shot up. Agatha, he may be flamboyant, but he's not homicidal. Bill cut gently in. Let's not jump to conclusions, we still lack proof. Agatha remained unconvinced. He visits out of nowhere. He delights in Fraith drama. He knows the family gossip better than you, and he has a temper. That last part is true, Charles admitted reluctantly. He once threatened a duchess for stepping on his dog. That's not helping, Bill said dryly. Henry stared at them with wide eyes. Is this normal for your village? Everyone suspecting everyone. Agatha lifted her chin. Completely normal. Keeps the community vibrant. Bill sighed. Chaotic, more like. Agatha ignored him and focused on Henry. If you're telling the truth, then someone else visited Prowse that night. Someone with motive, temper, and aristocratic entitlement. And heel taps? Bill asked. Henry shook his head. No, I heard no footsteps behind me, just the shouting. Agatha suddenly felt the thrill she always experienced when a mystery cracked open. We need to find Hector, privately, before he flees back to London. Charles looked offended. Hector doesn't flee, he pirouettes. Bill groaned softly. Agatha turned brisk. Come on, we have a lead and I refuse to lose momentum. Before they could leave, Henry raised a hand. There's something else I should tell you. He gestured toward a drawer in his desk. Prowse left something behind, or rather, he dropped it the last time he visited. He pulled out a torn slip of paper. Agatha recognized the handwriting instantly, Prowse's neat, clerkish style. The note read simply, Fraith meeting, confirm the truth before he does. Bill leaned in. Who is he? Henry whispered. Prowse never said, but he acted terrified, as though someone powerful wanted him silenced. Agatha felt a cold ripple. So Prowse wasn't just greedy, he was frightened. Charles swallowed hard. Agatha, what if the scandal isn't about an heir? What if it's about something worse? Agatha tucked the slip into her handbag. Then we'll uncover it. But first we find Hector. He's too theatrical to hide properly. Bill nodded. I'll get officers to check train stations. If he's fleeing, Charles huffed, he may be ridiculous, but he's family. Exactly why he must be questioned, Agatha shot back. They left Henry slumped over his desk, guilt finally loosening its grip on him. Outside, the sun dipped low, giving Mercester's streets a warm, late afternoon glow. A different atmosphere, reflective rather than threatening. Agatha walked briskly, handbag swinging. Charles trudged beside her, looking increasingly like a man dragged toward unpleasant truth. Bill followed with patient resignation. As they reached Charles's convertible, Agatha paused. If Hector shouted at Prowse, he knew about the sealed packet. How? Charles slumped against the car. Because I told him everything. He insisted he could help. I should have known better. Agatha softened slightly. People manipulate fear, Charles. Don't blame yourself. Bill unlocked the car door. Let's return to Carsley. We'll regroup. Agatha nodded and settled into her seat. As they drove, her mind ticked through clues. Forged letters, heel taps, missing coats, opportunistic cousins. Each piece formed a pattern, but not yet the whole picture. Back home, the cottage lights glowed warmly. Hodge greeted her with a loud, indignant yowl, as though demanding updates on the investigation. Agatha scooped him up, pressing her cheek to his soft fur. Don't worry, I'll sort this mess. Hodge purred loudly, then swatted her hand, reminding her that mysteries were fine, but dinner was more urgent. Agatha sighed, kettle humming faintly behind her. One problem at a time, darling. One problem at a time. You might at least pretend not to flee, Agatha snapped, marching across the Barfield house terrace. Hector Fraith had already retreated 3 elegant steps, hands fluttering like startled swans. My dear Agatha, I never flee, he protested. I reposition strategically. Then strategically reposition yourself back here, Bill Wong said, blocking Hector's escape with weary patience. We need your statement. Hector sagged against a stone pillar, dramatic as ever. Very well, but I warn you, my nerves are unraveling by the minute. I haven't eaten since luncheon. You had a full cream tea at 2, Charles muttered. That was medicinal. Agatha folded her arms. Tell us about Edmund Prowse. Start with why you were shouting at him. Hector's posture collapsed. I wasn't shouting. I was projecting. Prowse said, horrid man, that he'd uncovered details about my financial indiscretions. You mean debts, Agatha said. Hector winced. I prefer the French term. Debts. Sounds lighter. Bill stepped in. What exactly did Prowse threaten? That he'd publish nonsense about my investments and imply mismanagement. Agatha raised a brow. Is it nonsense? It is creative interpretation, Hector admitted. Anyway, he grabbed my sleeve when I tried to leave. I pulled away and, oh blast, it must have been then that the silver button came off. Agatha exchanged a look with Bill. The button found under the church pew had clearly belonged to Hector's coat. So, Charles said, his tone dry as chalk, you tore your coat and dashed off before the man died. Convenient. Oh, don't be tedious, Charles, Hector sighed. I left while he was very much alive and infuriating. I would never murder anyone. It stains everything. Your moral compass is spotless, Agatha murmured. Bill noted it down anyway. You're confirming that after tearing the button, you left Prowse standing? Yes. He shouted something unpleasant about having allies inside this very house. Hector gestured vaguely toward Barfield's grand facade. Said he'd received information from a loyal Fraith servant. Charles stiffened. A servant? Agatha felt a prickling suspicion. Who exactly would Prowse label loyal around here? Hector shrugged. He didn't say, just implied someone long-term, someone who knew where things were hidden. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Only one man fit that description, Mr. Leland, the Fraith butler of nearly 4 decades. Inside Barfield House the atmosphere changed. The kitchen was warmly lit, tidy as a chapel, and smelled faintly of nutmeg and copper polish. Mr. Leland stood at the centre, hands clasped behind his back as if awaiting judgment from heaven. Mrs. Bloxby, serene as always, sat at the table with a small cup of tea. Agatha began without preamble. Leland, what did Prowse want from you? A tiny tremor betrayed him. Madam, I cannot— Yes, you can, Agatha pressed. He mentioned receiving information from inside this house. We already know someone opened Charles's writing cabinet. Charles bristled. Still offended about that. Mrs. Bloxby gave Leland a gentle smile. The truth will help you more than silence. The old man's shoulders slumped. Very well. I have been a fool. Agatha leaned forward, her heartbeat picking up. Years ago, Leland began, I discovered letters among the late master's documents. They confirmed what had only ever been whispered, that an illegitimate Fraith child truly existed. Charles's jaw dropped. My father told me nothing. He meant to resolve it quietly, Leland said, but after his passing, I feared that public knowledge would harm the estate beyond repair. I hid the letters in the cabinet. Agatha frowned. Why not destroy them? Leland looked pained. Destroying history felt a worse offence. Bill folded his arms. So what did Prowse want? He discovered somehow that the letters existed. He cornered me near the footpath and demanded them. I refused. He became aggressive. I tried to leave. Leland's voice broke. He lunged to grab my pocket, but he slipped on the mossy beam. I reached for him, but he fell, Agatha finished, the picture forming clearly. Leland nodded miserably. I panicked. I feared I'd be blamed, so I arranged the scene. I removed his coat, scattered his pockets. I thought it would suggest robbery. Foolish. Foolish. Not malicious, Mrs. Bloxby said softly. Charles exhaled. Well, you can't stay in service after this. It's disgraceful. But as Agatha watched him, she saw the panic flash across his aristocratic features, the thought of losing the man who kept Barfield running. Charles cleared his throat. Although, perhaps there can be a transition, a dignified one, in time. Leland bowed his head, shaking. Bill spoke with measured calm. This will all need to go through proper channels. Yes, yes, Charles said quickly, clearly already regretting his earlier bluster. But surely we don't need to mention his exact role in polishing the silver. Mrs. Bloxby gave Agatha a quiet look, one that said, Be gentle now. Agatha, surprisingly, did feel a prickle of pity. The butler hadn't murdered Prowse, but he had scrambled the evidence badly enough to confuse everyone. Still, something gnawed at her. She turned to Bill. Leland's description fits the accident, but the mud on Prowse's shoes still doesn't match the spot where he fell. Bill nodded. I noticed that too. Agatha looked back at Leland. Did you move the body? No, madam. I left him where he fell. Then someone else moved him, Agatha said quietly. A hush fell. Even the kitchen clock seemed to hold its breath. Who would do that? Charles asked, unsettled. Agatha felt the answer forming like mist. Someone had interfered. Someone determined to steer suspicion toward the wrong people. Someone who perhaps knew the truth about the sealed packet, or feared it. But before she could voice her growing suspicion, footsteps boomed down the corridor. Hector burst in, waving a handkerchief dramatically. I say, is anyone making tea? All this confession business is positively draining. Agatha nearly threw the kettle at him. Mrs. Bloxby rose to her feet, smoothing her skirt with calm finality. I think we should let Bill speak with Leland privately. Agatha, Charles, perhaps a walk will help clear the air. As long as Hector doesn't follow, Agatha muttered. Hector gasped. How hurtful. I shall remain in the drawing room with a restorative sherry. "You don't live here," Charles snapped, but Hector had already drifted off like a decorative cloud. Outside the kitchen, the house felt oddly hushed. Charles walked beside Agatha, hands jammed in the pockets of his immaculate coat. "I can't believe Leland hid all this," he said. "I can," Agatha replied. "Butlers live for secrets. It's their preferred currency." Charles managed a weak smile. "Still, it's rather a blow. My family history turning into a village soap opera." "Better than a London scandal," Agatha said. "At least here we only gossip after church." He glanced sideways at her. "You don't think Leland pushed Prowse?" "No," Agatha said. "But someone interfered after the fall. Someone who wanted us looking in the wrong direction." "Any ideas?" "Oh, plenty. None pleasant." They paused by the old yew archway. The air held a faint evening chill, though the sky was still pale. Agatha felt her usual thrill. She was on to something. The case had shifted again, revealing a seam of truth she could almost pry open. Bill joined them moments later, expression thoughtful. "I'll take Leland in tomorrow. It's accidental death with a panicked cover-up. Nothing more sinister." Agatha shook her head. "No, there is something more. Prowse's body was moved. Someone else touched that scene. Someone who didn't want us to understand the fall." Bill frowned. "Who would—" Footsteps approached. Mrs. Bloxby emerged, carrying her handbag with the air of a woman who has decided something quietly momentous. "I didn't want to mention this earlier," she said, "but in the church this afternoon, after our meeting, I found something beneath one of the pew cushions." Agatha leaned forward eagerly. "Found what?" Mrs. Bloxby opened her palm. A silver glint sat there, a button, embossed with the Fraith crest. But not Hector's. This one was older, subtly different in design. Agatha felt a jolt, sharp and cold. Someone else in the Fraith lineage, someone with reason, temper and access, had been much closer to Prowse than they had realized. "Bill," she said softly, "we've been chasing the wrong person again." And in the moment before Charles demanded an explanation, Agatha felt it. The thrilling, terrifying certainty that the case had just tightened around them all. Hodge stretched on Agatha's armchair when she returned home later, blinking up at her with regal disinterest before curling his tail around her elbow. The kettle sighed in the kitchen. Agatha muttered to herself, already plotting her next move. The real confrontation, she knew, was still ahead. Agatha Raisin's cottage felt unusually peaceful, which made her instantly suspicious. Peace in Castley never lasted long, and certainly not when she was involved. Still, the hush of a warm morning pressed pleasantly around the kitchen, and even Agatha conceded that she might allow herself 5 minutes of calm. Only 5. Any more would look self-indulgent. She set down her mug, surveyed the table, and groaned. Hodge had, in the night, reorganized her manuscript notes. His system appeared to involve selecting the most important sheet, sitting on it with regal determination, and grooming his tail over the remaining pages. He lifted his head now, eyes half-lidded, as if asking whether she intended to disturb a genius at work. "Oh, do get off," she said, tugging gently at the corner of the smothered page. Hodge responded by lying flatter, spreading himself like an expensive fur stole with claws. "You impossible creature. That's the closing paragraph. If you crease it, I shall never forgive you." Hodge yawned, revealing pink disdain, and thumped his tail. Agatha decided this was as good a sign as any that normal life had resumed. Murder, blackmail, inheritance hysterics, all settled for the moment. Only the cat remained reliably troublesome. Her answering machine flashed red. Roy's voice poured from the speaker in a dramatic torrent. "Aggie, darling, you simply cannot skip tonight. The party will collapse without you. Do you understand? Collapse. Bring something glittery, and try not to frighten anyone important." A breathless beat. "Call me immediately, or sooner." Agatha stabbed the stop button. "Frighten anyone important," she muttered, "as though I go around brandishing axes." She lit a cigarette, took a thoughtful draw, then caught her reflection in the kitchen glass. Her hair, mercifully, was behaving today. The blue cardigan was flattering. Perhaps she would go to Roy's party after all. It never hurt to be seen, admired, or envied. A soft knock sounded. Agatha frowned. The morning was far too early for deliveries or gossip. She opened the door to find Mrs. Bloxby holding a basket covered in a yellow cloth, looking as though she had materialized from a hymn about kindness. "I hope it isn't a bad moment," Mrs. Bloxby said. "I've brought fresh scones." Agatha stepped aside. "It's never a bad moment for scones, unless Roy made them." "Perish the thought," Mrs. Bloxby replied, laughing gently. "May I sit?" Agatha cleared a space, pushing aside Hodge, who sniffed the basket with reverent anticipation. "Only if you protect the scones from that thief." Mrs. Bloxby folded herself into a chair, smoothing her skirt. "I imagine this past week has been rather trying." "Trying? It's been ghastly," Agatha said. "Bodies in hedgerows, forged letters, Charles making that face he makes when he suspects he might be related to someone common, and people expecting me to remain calm." Mrs. Bloxby poured the tea Agatha had forgotten to brew, using the emergency pot Agatha kept for moments that required dignity. "You navigated it admirably." "Ha! I stumbled through it with the grace of a drunk goat." The vicar's wife smiled. Even goats reach their destination in the end. Agatha tried not to soften. She tore a scone, slathered it in butter, and took a defiant bite. Mrs. Bloxby's calm was infuriatingly contagious. Agatha felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Perhaps she did deserve scones after all. Mrs. Bloxby selected one for herself, though she barely tasted it. Her gaze moved toward the kitchen window, where Carsley's modest serenity lay framed, hedges, chimneys, and the faint hum of a lawnmower. "You know," she said gently, "temptation comes in many forms." Agatha narrowed her eyes. "If you're talking about Charles, I'm talking about admiration," Mrs. Bloxby said. "Sometimes we want it from those least capable of offering it sincerely." Agatha bristled, though not unkindly. "I don't chase admiration." "No," Mrs. Bloxby agreed. "It chases you. That can be even more dangerous." Agatha huffed, pretending the remark made no sense whatsoever. She took another scone to demonstrate she was unmoved, but something in her chest fluttered uncomfortably. Mrs. Bloxby often saw too much. The phone rang. Agatha snatched it up, prepared to fend off Roy's shrieking. Instead, Charles's dry drawl drifted down the line. "Agatha, I thought it prudent to say thank you." "Well," she said, glowing despite herself, "I suppose you should." "You were remarkably competent," he continued. "For you." Her glow lifted a teaspoon. "Charles. And," he added, "try not to set London alight tonight. I know how you get when Roy encourages you." Agatha hung up. Mrs. Bloxby blinked. "Was that Charles?" "He's lucky he wasn't standing here," Agatha snapped, though her cheeks warmed. "Setting London alight indeed. I've only ever lit one tiny carpet." Hodge chose that moment to hoist himself onto the table, nosing the scones with determined hope. Agatha waved him off, but he snagged half a crumb and retreated triumphantly. Mrs. Bloxby rose with her empty basket. "I should leave you to your day. Promise you'll rest before the party." "I shall do no such thing," Agatha said. "Resting invites wrinkles." They exchanged a warm look, Agatha pretending exasperation, Mrs. Bloxby offering quiet sympathy, both grateful for the other's steady presence. After she left, Agatha wandered back to her notes. Her thoughts drifted over the past week. Prowse's deceit, Leland's panic, Charles's mortification, Hector's theatrics, Henry Colstone's trembling confessions, human weakness everywhere, woven through greed, pride, desperation and hope, temptations of every flavour. No wonder life refused to stay simple. Hodge, having finished inspecting crumbs, curled against her elbow. His purr vibrated through the papers, sending her neat stacks sliding crookedly. Agatha sighed. "You are a menace." He blinked, unrepentant, and rested one paw on her wrist as though claiming her. Agatha lit a final cigarette, blowing a thoughtful plume toward the kitchen vent. She tilted her head, studying Hodge's whiskers, the warm clutter of her kitchen, the scone crumbs on her cardigan. Carsley might be ridiculous, infuriating, nosy, and occasionally murderous, but it was hers. And, she supposed grudgingly, she belonged to it. "Well, darling boy," she murmured, scratching Hodge's chin, "what trouble shall we tempt next?" Hodge stretched luxuriously, as if accepting the challenge. And in the warm, quiet morning, Agatha smiled, ready for whatever nonsense the village cooked up next.